Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm okay.
You're what? Go ahead.
No, I'm inside because it's too cold in the California winter to go outside.
But there's a skylight right behind your head, is there not?
I'm trying to obscure the skylight with my head.
You're doing a good job, but I know it's there.
There's a skylight, but it's filthy, so I'm obscuring it. I'm in my family's Neutra era house, which could still use some cleaning up.
What was that word before? Era?
Neutra. Richard Neutra.
Famous modernist architect?
Modernist architect, and this house was designed by one of his assistants.
That's not the same as being designed by him, but congratulations anyway.
Not quite, but it's not nearly quite. But it's a beautiful house, needs some work. That's all.
Hey, you know what you keep forgetting, Mickey?
What?
You are forgotten. You keep forgetting that you're forgotten, and so I need to introduce this every time.
People on the internet say I'm forgotten, so feel free.
No, I don't mean you're forgotten broadly. It's just that you don't appear on blogging heads often enough for people. There are people who don't know that you co-founded Blogging Heads. There are people who don't know this is Blogging Heads, see? There are people who just subscribe to the Wright Show podcast. They don't know that this has anything to do with Blogging Heads. So I have to tell people that you're Mickey Kaus, co-founder of Blogging Heads TV, these many years ago. At some point, you went to the dark side. You're now a Trump supporter. And
I wouldn't say that. I would say I voted for him, and I'm considering.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was getting mixed up between voting for a candidate and supporting the candidate. I forgot about people who vote for the candidate they don't want to win.
Well, there are a lot of people who voted for Trump and have since renounced their support.
But not you. So why are you bringing this up?
Well, because I may not support him again. I'm undecided.
Yeah, right. You always drag it out like this. You always try to milk these things for all the drama you think they're worth when they're not worth any, because we all know what you're going to do.
That's how I make the big bucks. But last time I dragged it out, it was for voting for Gore instead of Bush. So, and I was
that was a real. We were all on the edge of our seats, boy.
I was accused on the right of faking it because I was obviously going to vote for Gore. Yeah. So
there are people still recovering from the trauma of waiting for you to declare. That was
we're keeping people guessing, maintaining the drama.
By the way, should we say this is our gala end of year and end of decade show? That's why I am dressed in a festive sweater vest, and you're dressed in a festive sweatshirt.
I'm going for my best Jeffrey Epstein look. I think I got it down.
God, that's kind of grim. Mickey.
I think I nailed it.
I think you may regret that moment. We should tell our podcast listeners that it really is worth checking out the video a few minutes in to see what Mickey looked like at that moment. So yeah, let's not talk about Epstein right away. Although I do think as we review the events and trends of the last year and last decade, I am going to submit that one of the trends is growing paranoia broadly. You know, people are becoming more paranoid. And that's since you were ahead of the curve. They're catching up with you. You were born that way, and they're just getting there now.
Exactly. Good point. Okay, well...
Can I just file one complaint before we start?
Sure.
You kind of messed up my timing. So I have concluded after years, if not decades, of careful phenomenological analysis that it takes caffeine close to an hour to actually hit my brain after I drink my coffee. That's my belief. I know you think otherwise about your own biochemistry, but that's my belief. And so I try to time it so that when we start talking, I will be articulate and sharp. I'll be on top of my game. And I've learned from bitter experience that you're almost always about 20 minutes late finally getting your shit together so that we can record. So I had my coffee with that in mind only 50 minutes ago. 50, not an hour ago. And you surprised us and actually showed up on time.
This is the new me.
Yeah, well, this is the new slow me. I'll tell you when the caffeine hits.
Okay, yeah, please do. So then we can start paying attention.
Yeah. So what are we going to talk about? Should we... You had suggested that we each come up with some category that we're going to declare the winner of, like best blank, biggest blank of the last year, the last decade. I'm not. I did my best. I'm not sure how I did. Just a couple of them each. Do you want to start with one, or should we engage more in this timeless banter?
Why don't you start by attacking my last article? You were going to do that.
Oh yeah. So, well, this brings us back to paranoia and the fact that you were paranoid before it was cool. So, we both have newsletters. Perhaps we should mention their names, Mickey. Mine is called the Nonzero newsletter. That's Nonzero, to which people can subscribe for free if they go to nonzero.org or Google Nonzero and Substack.
And mine's called Kausfiles, like my blog. And it's also on Substack. Everybody's on Substack. Substack is taking over the world.
The newsletter world.
You're doing much better than I am on Substack.
Well, I've been at the newsletter biz longer than you have. You mean I have more subscribers?
Correct. You have that hip, not mindfulness angle that seems to be working for you.
How many subscribers do you have? You don't have to say. That's not bad. You just started, didn't you?
Yeah. No, but it's I've hit a plateau. You get all the easy ones, and then the next ones are harder.
Well, you got to keep saying crazy stuff. And I got to say, you're doing a pretty good job of that.
Well,
why isn't it working?
I'm trying.
Let's turn immediately to the crazy thing you said most recently.
My latest crazy thing seems to have turned off both my supporters and my opponents. So it's newsletter gold.
You mean they responded negatively, or they just showed no signs of having read it?
Negatively.
Well, how would you summarize your thesis?
Well, I was arguing with a friend of mine, Jacob Weisberg, about Trump, and I conceded the point that yes, if Trump was elected, the country would come apart, and if he's not elected, the country won't come apart. I mean,
Jacob agreed with you about that?
No, he didn't show any particular reaction at all, but I sort of filed that away.
He plays his cards pretty close to the vest.
No, he had utter contempt for my Trump support. But
I know that. I've talked to him about it.
So the main look was a look of utter contempt. But I filed it away as an interesting idea because I have always thought that the party that's angriest in a lot of conflicts wins. So in the classic is the 2000 election recount. Republicans had been out of power. They were really pissed off at the Clintons. If they had lost the 2000 recount, they would have gone berserk. The Democrats would not have gone berserk, as evidenced by the fact that they didn't go berserk when Bush assumed the White House. So I think the Supreme Court, when they issued that ridiculous decision cutting short the recount, had in mind that if we don't do this, all hell's going to break loose. The Republican House, legislature in Florida isn't going to nominate the electors that the recount says they should nominate. There's going to be a huge fight over whose electors should be seated, and they're going to run out of time. So it's going to be a huge car crash. They avoided the car crash, but the car crash was based on the fact that the Republicans were so pissed off they weren't going to obey the recount. So they won. They were pissed off. They won. So if I was thinking voters like the Supreme Court in the back of their minds might think, the anti-Trumpers have been 4 long, painful years. They're not even over yet with this man that they think is a crook and an illegitimate president and just a horrible man and a racist. And they've been fighting back, and everything has been not coming up a winner for them. The Mueller report was a flop. This impeachment looks like it's probably going to be a flop, so they're down to the election. If they actually lose the election, are they going to just say, well, I guess we have another 4 more years of this, we better grit our teeth and, put our shoulder to the wheel? No, they're going to go berserk, even more berserk than they're already going. I mean, already we have Governor Cuomo refusing to sign a law that allows federal judges to perform marriages because some of those federal judges might be Trump appointees, Bob, and we couldn't have federal judges who are Trump appointees performing marriages in New York because they aren't who New York is. So we're going to have more craziness like that, and we're going to have more Antifa and more boycotts. And if your restaurant is owned by a Trump supporter, you're not supposed to go there. And
Okay, but you actually
craziness, and voters in the back of their minds. Let me finish the thought. Voters in the back of their minds sort of know that there's this craziness looming, and they're going to avoid it by not voting for Trump. That's the argument.
Okay, before we look for flaws in your argument, let's flesh it out a little. I mean, your newsletter, it sounded even more extreme than it sounds in your telling. For example, you said it will be yellow vests times 10. Well, the yellow vests in France times 1 was a big deal. I don't think you'll even see yellow vests times 1 if Trump wins. And you said it'll be Antifa times 50. Well, that's a little less dramatic because Antifa hasn't actually amounted to that many actual incidents, but still, I think that's an overstatement.
Antifa doesn't have guns, so.
Well, right. I would think times 50 means they get them or something, right? Or
something like that, yeah. We're 5 times bigger than France, so I can get around by saying it'll be.
Okay,
it'll be a yellow.
First, let me ask you: have you considered the possibility that the reason you had this theory is the same reason you voted for Trump, which is that you are in fact paranoid? I mean, that you voted for Trump because you had an inordinate fear of what immigrants would do to America. You take seriously the idea that they will try to reclaim California, for example, as you have said on this very platform in the past. And you have this idea that Democrats will revolt because you're paranoid. That would be like a nice, simple, unified theory for
it doesn't work. I'm not paranoid about immigrants. I'm here in Los Angeles surrounded by immigrants.
Mickey, you understand that one feature of paranoia is that paranoids always think they're not paranoid. Well, so this by itself is not dispositive.
Then I can't win, Bob. Then you have me.
Well, I wouldn't say can't win. It's just that your testimony is not relevant. There may be, if we can find people who know you and say you're not paranoid, and by the way, I have asked everyone I know who knows you, and they all agree you are paranoid, but that aside, if we can find some people who say you're not, their testimony might count. You have yourself said you are paranoid. Do you feel like, hey, can I just point out, we are now exactly an hour after the coffee ingestion. Do you sense my momentum growing here?
Yeah, it's ramping up, I can tell. So I am paranoid. I'm not my advocacy of immigration control. And, we take 1 million immigrants a year. That's plenty. I'm not for reducing that number. I'd be happy to, if we had control, I'd be happy to take that number. Is that too many low-skilled immigrants bid down the wages of unskilled workers who are the people who are in danger of dropping out of the bottom of society or were in danger until the recent recovery in which their wages have finally started to rise. That's not paranoia. That's supply and demand economics.
Well, that's your official main rationale.
I can't answer for my subconscious. Maybe I feel this way because of my adolescent sexual frustrations, Bob.
I was going to bring that up, but even aside from that, we will get to that. But even aside from that, you have yourself said you think that there will be what's the word, revanchism, where I just think they will try to take California away from you.
I think there's a potential for that is dismissed by the conventional wisdom as, it's ridiculous, it'll never happen. And I don't think it's ridiculous and to think that it might happen. It's unlikely to happen, especially as other immigrant groups add to the mix in California. There's no one group that's going to be able to claim California. But it's happened in other countries where, people cross the border and all of a sudden they decide they want to be part of their home country. Plus, we arguably stole this land for them. Plus, middle classes sometimes go crazy in times of economic distress, which is not now. So I just think it's possible. I think it's something to worry about. It's not something to dismiss.
Consistent with my grand unified theory of why you voted for Trump and why you have this crazy theory, semi-crazy theory, you also think that one consequence of Trump winning will be serious secession movements, right, in California and or elsewhere?
California is practically already trying to secede. We have our own environmental laws. We're trying to do all.
Yeah, but that's not secession.
We have our own immigration laws. We have a grandstanding anti-Trump governor. There's always a payoff in California for, as with Cuomo, pretending.
Did you say anti-drug?
Trump.
Oh, anti-Trump. Okay.
There's a payoff for showboating in the anti-Trump department, and so that we're on the verge of saying, we want to have states' rights here, and it's Trump is pushing back and saying, no, you have to suck it up and take my environmental rules, and at some point somebody's going to. There already is, I'm sure, a secessionist movement somewhere. And in California, and it's going to grow a bit. It's going to become more respectable. And nothing's going to happen. I don't think California doesn't have an army. We're not going to start a civil war. But I just think there's going to be that. So I'm not talking about violence. I'm talking about a fraying of social bonds. So pro-Trump people don't want to associate with anti-Trump people. In anti-Trump areas, pro-Trump people are shunned. Pro-Trump businesses are shunned. There are boycotts.
I think there may be more of that kind of thing if Trump wins. I mean, it's interesting to game out. If Trump wins, I don't know. I will personally feel, and this is consistent with your theory, that I should resort to something I haven't resorted to so far because it will be so dispiriting. That said, I see problems with your premises. One of them is that the explanation for the way Republicans responded to the recount in Florida in the famous Brooks Brothers riot, although I believe there was a picture in your very issue of the newsletter of the Brooks Brothers riot. Was there not? Where did I recently see a picture?
There was a picture.
There was, and it turns out almost none of them look like they're wearing Brooks Brothers stuff. But that aside,
no, they were wearing Brooks Brothers shirts, Bob. They're just not wearing.
Oh, I see. They weren't wearing the blazers and the suits. Okay. In any event, the alternative theory is that Republicans, ironically, since they emphasize, quote, law and order more than Democrats, ironically are more unruly than Democrats. I think there's actually some truth to that. I think Republican elite politicians, and I'm thinking of Newt Gingrich, got in the business of stoking this kind of, it's kind of behavior and the emotions underlying the behavior before the Democrats did. Do you agree that if we do like a post-mortem on how we got to the point we're at in terms of the degree of political polarization, that in some ways the Republicans were actually pioneers, that they were stoking populist resentment of the other party's elites and the other party before Democrats were, or more than Democrats were?
It's hard to say. I mean, first, E.J. Dionne wrote a very good piece years ago saying the animosity in Congress all hinges back to this one disputed election in Indiana, I think, where the Democrats basically railroaded a man named McIntyre or McIntosh. I think I have that right. There was some disputed election that was very bitter, and the Democrats sort of resorted to thuggish tactics, and so even E.J. Dionne admitted the Democrats started it. Second, we had Bob Shrum and other consultants advocating populism for years. I ridiculed it, probably wrongly. I think Shrum was onto something. I especially ridiculed Richard Gephardt's trade position, which is now more or less position.
Yeah, but those were just policy positions.
But it was populism and called itself populism.
Yeah, but it was policy populism. It wasn't
of the elites.
Gephardt wasn't encouraging them to hate Republic or any kind of elites or anything, I don't think.
No, Gephardt was hardly a revolutionary, but I'd say, but the general sense of it was the elites are screwing you over. If you look at Gore's acceptance speech in 2000 in Los Angeles, it was all about, the mysterious elites that are screwing over your lives.
Was it?
He didn't advocate like rioting to stop the mysterious elites. You were supposed to vote for him to stop the mysterious elites, but you wouldn't expect a presidential candidate to advocate rioting, right? That's what you do when you don't have political power.
I didn't remember that. So he was ahead of his time.
So I think it's, the Republicans are very good at it, but, it was a symbiotic.
I mean, I would say George W. Bush was more anti-elite than Al Gore, right? I mean, if you look at that election.
Culturally.
He embodied resentment of cultural elites. I mean, he took great pains to somehow hang on to that Texas accent, even though did he go to prep school? Or did he stay in Midland and go to high school?
I don't know. He went to Yale and Harvard Business School.
Yeah, he went to Yale. But if he didn't go north until college, he can defend hanging on to the action, I guess. So never mind.
Really, he definitely hated the smarty pants at Yale, and he
totally.
He clung to that bitterness, even though he was in skull and bones at the highest levels of the smarty pants at Yale. But so culturally he did stuck that. Anyway, it's many people agree with you that the Republicans
I'm not sure
are more prone to anger and going crazy, and they also have more access to firearms. So the danger from the right is greater. But I am not talking about actual civil war violence. I'm talking about socially society being ripped apart so that we don't think of ourselves as fellow citizens. We think of ourselves as two warring camps, more so than even under Nixon in the 60s.
Yeah, but there's an irony on the kind of left of center half of the spectrum, which is that the real hellraisers on the left are not the most ardent resistors, and some of them are reacting against the resistance, and so much that they're being accused of being the anti-Trump left, as David Brooks, I think, recently called them, or the Trumpin' left, or whatever. So it's like, so the people who are most emotional in their resistance of Trump are just not the kind to go around throwing bombs. You know what I'm saying? They're like wine moms and stuff.
Right. We'll get to that. There's actually an interesting explanation for that. But
it's relevant. It's relevant to your theory.
The Matt Taibbis and the Glenn Greenwalds of the world are not that riotously anti-Trump. They're anti-Trump. They're not the people I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people like my friends who were busy organizing PACs in various places to support Democratic congressional candidates.
That's my point, is that they are channeling their energies conventionally, and the people who are more edgy, I mean Glenn, probably more than Matt Taibbi, is very edgy, and there are people edgier than him on that part of the spectrum, but they're not the people who are going to react in crazy fashion to a Trump victory. Right. That's my point, is that the people who are at the heart of the resistance are the kind to like go to meetings and stuff.
We're agreeing, but when it all gets crushed in November, if it gets crushed in this scenario and all their working within the system fails and they're faced with 4 more years of Trump, and they think, Trump unleashed, rid of his staff, rid of his minders, nobody in control of him anymore. He thinks he knows what he's doing. They're not going to say, hey, let's work within the system for 4 more years. That's you yourself said. You're going to feel you have to take it up to another level, do something else.
Yeah, but I don't think I'm going to actually do anything. Like I always say, if Trump wins this time, I will actually leave the country. But, I actually won't.
Not going to leave the country, but something has to give. There's just something, they're not just going to go about their regular lives and say, I'll deal with this when I'm a senior citizen. I mean, they're going to have to do something.
I think they'll calm down because for one thing, they'll say, well, okay, but now it's at least a maximum of 4 years. We survived the first 4, just 4 more years, and then he's gone forever. Of course, the problem is he's not going to be gone forever in any event. He's going to be a force via Twitter in Republican politics until he has eaten his last Big Mac.
Well, that was Obama's big mistake. Obama faded from the scene. He had this whole organizing network that was Obama for America that was supposed to provide him with a Hugo Chavez-like political presence that was permanent. No, I mean, Chavez exercised power even when he wasn't president. I'm not imputing.
That's just a funny comparison. I'm sorry.
I'm not imputing ideology. I'm just saying he was on the verge of something new, which is being a political boss who commanded a huge army of voters without holding office. And so he could anoint the next president. He can't hold the office himself, but he had this whole organized, and he gave it all up. He blew it. He retired to wherever he's retired to.
Hey, he's making great documentaries, man.
Yeah, and Trump is not going to make that mistake.
Well, but Trump also is positioned to use his post-presidency leverage in a way that Obama just wasn't. Obama didn't have like, 30 million people who would just do whatever he said and harass whichever politician he told them to harass. By the way, just wasn't part of his brand to harass politicians. If that's not what he does. But Trump can make every Republican politician live in fear after he's left the White House. Do you agree?
I'm not so sure because, he came on the scene pretty fast. He does command its loyalty, but once he doesn't have power, is he going to be able to command the loyalty?
But look at his power now. His power now is mobilizing people on Twitter. He'll still be able to do that.
Somebody new like Josh Hawley comes along and is actually running for something and gaining traction for the presidency, and Trump says, I command you to go against Josh Hawley. Are the Trump troops going to follow their leader? I don't think so. Trump's a much livelier presence if he loses. If he loses, he's not going to go away. He'll probably run again. He won't run again. You're not going to get rid of Trump just by defeating him.
Well, that's what I just said, isn't it?
No, I'm saying we were talking about if he finishes a second term, is he not going to go away? And I think
what I meant to say is that the people looking forward to his being out of the picture after another term are confused. He will never go away.
Right.
He will use Twitter to be a force forever.
His power now is the power to primary any Republican who goes against him. And there will be people on the right who will spontaneously primary any Republican who strays from the fold. But I don't think Trump himself will be able to order it. He can't order it now. His interventions in elections have been more failures than successes. He elected a Democrat in Alabama. He wants to bounce Sessions in Alabama. He's losing that. He's constantly intervening, and his candidate is losing. So where does this like magical power come from?
Well, it depends on which election you're talking about, but sometimes that's just a reflection of the general dynamic that when extremists have their way during the primary on either side, their candidate is more likely to lose because they're not moderate enough to win the general. But that's not saying he's not powerful. If he succeeds in getting his candidate nominated, as he did in some of these cases, right, that's power. But anyway,
he's not going to succeed in Alabama. Sessions is going to get the nomination.
Okay. So should we get into our like categories, our like decade end and year end awards?
Sure.
I think you should go first. I've got a feeling yours are better than mine, that you're better prepared.
The first
did you actually, by the way, did you actually wear that sweatshirt with Jeffrey Epstein in mind?
No.
I mean, you could have. It's the kind of thing he did, right?
I thought it makes me look like Gregory Peck and Roman Holiday.
So that was my first, right before I thought of Jeffrey Epstein, I thought of Gregory Peck, yes.
I didn't shave thinking it would maybe look like Epstein.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the unshaven look, I think, is the key.
Did he habitually wear the 1 to 2 day growth? Was that part of his look, or is that just his prison look?
I think that's his prison look.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know. I rode a bicycle past him once, but I did not see him.
Really? You saw him in person?
I didn't see him. I was there. I rode a bicycle past him.
Well, how do you know you rode it past him if you didn't see him?
Because the person I was riding a bicycle with said, that's Jeffrey Epstein.
Huh. Well, you blew that opportunity.
What was I going to do?
Always network with networkers, That's what they say.
So... Well, do I want to start with the serious one? Let's start with the serious one.
Okay.
The most interesting article I've read in the last 6 months, perhaps not the last year, but is this article by this guy, Julius Krein. Do you know him?
No.
He's an
Krein?
Yes, correct. He's
perhaps related to Deborah Krein, who was in my third grade class, but possibly not. Go ahead.
Well, there is the principle that they always actually are related, but that one seems like a long shot, unless you grew up in South Dakota where he grew up.
No.
So he runs a journal called American Affairs. He's supposedly funded by Peter Thiel. Who knows? He's a really smart guy. He gave a talk at this National Conservative Conference, that he's especially impressive in his utter contempt for any sort of conventional thought. And his latest piece is about the new class war, and the new class war is not the divide between city and country, between working class and upper class, between the uneducated and the educated, but it's a class war between the top 10% or maybe 20% and the top 0.1%. In other words, I always had this idea, and this was
Are we talking wealth here? This is just a money gauge?
Money.
Okay, money.
I know
which side I'm on.
I had this idea in the money spectrum when I wrote my book. It was based on the analysis by Robert Wright that they're the uneducated people who are competing with in trade with uneducated overseas labor and also with immigrant labor, but that wasn't Wright's point, but you could infer it, and they're getting screwed. Okay, they were going down. Then there were the people with the so-called symbolic analysts, he called them, who were the educated sort of ad executives.
Oh, I remember this. He wrote this piece in the New Republic, didn't he?
Correct.
And then it became a book. I think I edited this piece. Symbolic analysts. It's all coming back. Okay.
You said Reich has provided the analytic framework for what we're talking about. So, okay, and the top 30% were the professionals who were succeeding in the new economy because the premium to skills was rising. Skills were still viable. They were not subject to either trade competition or technological obsolescence or immigrant competition, and so they were succeeding, and they were sort of forming their own affluent class, seceding behind the walls of gated communities and not associating with the rest of the body politic. And that was the basic division, was the symbolic analyst versus that. And I buy that. In my book, it's sort of the threat to social equality is the top 30% walling themselves off, going to their own schools, going to their own doctors, looking down their noses at the 70%. And so it's hard to have an equal society with that sort of.
Well, what conventional wisdom is this busting here? The idea that it's actually the top 1% against everyone, or what?
Yes,
but nobody really thinks
his point.
that.
Well, his point is the top 30%, except for the tippy top, isn't doing that well. They're economically, yes, some charts to show their wages aren't increasing. They're not booming the way they boomed in the 80s when Robert Reich wrote that. They're sort of stagnated the way we claim the working class is stagnated. Plus, they hate their jobs. Okay, lawyers have been proletarianized. Doctors have been proletarianized. They hate being lawyers. They hate being doctors.
So you mean they join the other 70% in resenting the 1%?
No, they don't do that. That's what I hope they do.
They're poised to do that. They just don't know it.
There's the potential there's a potential for a moment where the bottom 99% hate the top 1%. Then politics is easy. You nationalize the top 1% and you've won. It's like the anarchists in Spain. Anarchism grew in Spain because everybody in the south of Spain, they worked on these latifundias, these big farms where there was like one overseer and 1,000 workers. All they had to do was shoot the overseer and they could run their own farm themselves. Okay. We would be approaching a latifundia situation where all the riches go to Mark Zuckerberg, and all you have to do is put Mark Zuckerberg out of business, and you can socialize,
nationalize Facebook.
Okay, they're not doing that because I think, and crime doesn't really get into this. He gets into part of it that they are reacting by becoming Democrats and becoming the more extreme Democrats. So the support for Bernie and for Elizabeth Warren isn't from the proles. It isn't from the workers. It's from these top 30%ers who really are not having a good time and they're pissed off about it. So they're for big systematic change, and they're drawn to radical solutions in a way that the working class, which supports Biden, isn't drawn to radical solutions.
But does the polling data support this? I mean, doesn't yes. Bernie Sanders actually have significant working class support?
I don't know about say he has polling data that suggests no, that the main support both Warren and Sanders has is from these symbolic analyst types. So
So what's a classic? What's a classic symbolic analyst? Who should we be thinking about here? Like doing what kind of job, sitting where?
I don't know. A management consultant, a writer, I guess an accountant would be the low end of symbolic analyst. A lawyer would be the classic.
Mid-level manager.
Lawyer would be the classic. Doctor. University professor. And my point is,
are these Dilbert people? Are these Scott Adams people?
That's a good question. I think they're Dilbert people. But my line is that the upper middle class was snobby before it got rich. In other words, if you read Barbara Ehrenreich's book, Fear of Falling, which is a very good book, she talks about how snobby the middle class are, and it's because they're insecure, not because they're rich, but because their financial situation is precarious, and they react by, as Obama might say, clinging to their degrees. Right? They react by emphasizing non-material ways in which they are superior to the workers, who don't have those degrees. So why won't we just revert to that situation? If the middle class, top 30%, becomes anxious and relatively impoverished, unlike in the 80s and 90s when they were on top, they'll react by becoming more snobby, not less snobby.
Okay.
And the chances of them associating with the deplorables, which is what I would like to see, actually diminish. And I don't know where one goes from there. But
wait, you want what to diminish?
No, the chances of them allying with the so-called working class, the non-symbolic analysts, are low because they will be more snobby. They'll say, well, I may have the same income as a plumber, but I have a college degree and I can talk about Thucydides, so screw you. That makes alliance harder. The cultural clash will be greater.
And which one do you want to happen? You want alliance? You want the 99% to become a monolithic block or not?
Yeah. No, I think I do.
And then what will this block do? It seems to me there's a lot of internal divisions among them, like abortion, immigration, and things like that.
Right. Well, you would have to overcome those things, but it would have. We would be closer to achieving the ideal, which would be control the borders, let in lots of immigrants, but keep it under control, raise wages at the bottom, have a national healthcare system, and all live a happy life. So
if we just assume that all the differences of opinion within this monolithic block are magically resolved in the way that Mickey Kaus would want them to be resolved, we are living in the ideal world.
But the crying point is we're closer to that than we thought we were when we were believing when the Robert Reich analysis was the obvious correct one. It's no longer the obvious correct one because the upper 30% isn't happy. Well, okay, but Robert Reich is vindicated in the sense that there seems to be a major cleavage between the symbolic analysts who by and large don't like Trump and the traditional working class, which is much more likely to like him. That cleavage was there with Adlai Stevenson. Why did everybody who lived in a house that looked like this one? Yeah, with the Van Gogh print on the wall. I'm not going to swivel my camera to show it to you. Voted for Adlai Stevenson. It wasn't because they were rich. It was because that culturally, Stevenson was one of them. And Arthur Schlesinger famously wrote an attack on Nixon saying, Nixon, let's face it, lacks class. Okay. He's an uncultivated man. He's uncouth. Whereas Adlai.
Too bad he didn't live to see Trump.
That's nothing new. We've lived with that before. That's not the product of.
Well, okay. I mean, the way you become a genius academic is to come up with a new term for old things, and Reich thought of symbolic analyst, so he wins. But leaving all that aside.
Reich's point was new, which is the Adlai Stevenson types not only were snobby, but now they were the economic victors. They hadn't, when Barbara Ehrenreich wrote her book, they weren't the economic victors. They were just middle-class snobs.
I see. And you're saying that's what he was wrong about because they wound up not thriving economically.
He was right about it for 30 years.
Yeah.
The crying's just saying that he's not right about it anymore.
I don't know. This is a pretty elaborate or obscure theory for gain that seems to me limited. I mean, I don't know how illuminating I find any of this.
It's illuminating, at least to the extent it explains the Bernie and Warren support from the upper class. That's useful.
If it turns out you're right, and Bernie doesn't have a fair amount of working class support. Although I gotta say, I think more than people realize, some of the working class supporters of Trump could live with Bernie and would be more tempted by a Bernie candidacy. Sure. Let me just interject. Let me just interject a political question here. Do you agree with me? My view is, and actually, just over the past week, we've started to see more journalism to this effect, that Bernie is, in one sense or another, a serious contender. But my view has long been that he is a stronger general election candidate than a lot of people realize, even though the polling data supports this, so I don't know why they wouldn't realize it. But in any event, he's a stronger general election candidate than most people realize. And I would go further and say that he would be the strongest Democrat in the general election if he could liberate himself from this one position, which is going to allow Republicans to launch these attack ads that say he will make you give up your health insurance for an untried system. I think he has to find a way, if he's going to actually win the general election, he has to find a way to lessen that concern, to preempt that attack ad. Do you, how much of this, if any, do you agree with?
He and Warren too.
I thought she was already trying to wiggle loose from it, although I'm confused on that.
Right. Well, but
he's not. He's not trying.
Well, because yes, but I agree. Well, you can always wiggle loose after he wins the nomination. That's the point.
But
I agree.
The concern is that he won't. But go ahead.
I think he's also vulnerable on what issue, Bob?
No.
On immigration, because he used to have. Well,
any Democrat is going to have to adopt that. More or less. I actually think we've talked about this,
and that's a big problem for the Democratic Party. In the general election, he's going to have to dial it back on immigration, just as he does.
But I think he's as well equipped as any candidate to dial it back on immigration, and better equipped than some, better positioned historically to do it.
I agree, but right now he's busy locking himself into the opposite position. Historically, he's been a
they all are. They all are.
But it seems to be wiggling out of it on healthcare is easier. But you're right. If he wiggles out of both those positions, I think he's a formidable candidate.
Well, yeah, but the one is a problem they all face. I'm comparing him to other candidates. They all face the problem of moderating a little on immigration before the general. He alone, even more than Warren, faces the problem of broadening our conception of what he might do with healthcare. And it's hard because he introduced actual legislation, right, that has his name on it. And I think what he needs to do at a minimum is, say, look, have somebody ask him, is Congress really going to pass your health care plan? Say, look, right. I realize there's a good chance they won't. Here is plan B. Here's what I'll do if I can't get this through Congress. Then you need to get a bunch of pundits to go, and you realize he can't get this through Congress.
I don't think you even need plan B. All he has to do is do your first part and say, look, I understand I'm not going to get everything I want. This is my opening position. This is what I ideally want, and this is where I'm heading. But we'll take what we can get. I think
it's tougher than you think. I think that attack ad is a killer. People are terrified of the unknown.
But I have one more point about this Crine article.
Okay.
Which is, if you look back on the 60s and the Port Huron statement, it was written by affluent people, affluent kids who were looking at
Remind us. The Port was that SDS or what?
Founding document of SDS. It was written in 1962, I think. Before the Vietnam War was a big issue. So it was.
By the way, youngsters, SDS stands for Students for a Democratic Society. They were a left-wing group during the 60s.
Correct, and they were founded by Tom Hayden and a bunch of other lefties. And it was an expression of what you might call bourgeois dissatisfaction. They were looking at an alienated future that they didn't like. Okay, they were we're in a similar situation now. If Crine is right. The top 30% who have a lot of power in society are looking at a future they don't like, okay? And I think a lot of people are looking at a future they don't like. We're looking at a future dominated by Amazon and Google, and we thought it was going to be wonderful, and it's not pleasant. We don't like it. Our kids are, going going AWOL on the internet, and the time is ripe for a sort of new Port Huron statement type thing that reflects not just deplorables versus the symbolic analysts, but actually comes from the symbolic analysts who said we don't like this future either. So it seemed to set up that sort of moment. I don't know what the new Port Huron statement say.
But you're envisioning a new Port Huron statement that isn't produced by the young generation as the original Port Huron statement was, right? You're like imagining a bunch of middle-aged people launching the next revolution?
Yes, I am.
Well, I'm afraid that doesn't happen on this planet.
I don't know. It's
well, I mean, it kind of does. It's like little mini revolutions. I mean, in fact, the Trump revolution draws heavily, but they didn't write any damn document.
I'm thinking of people like Krein himself. So how old is he? 30?
I don't know.
I mean, the people of the Conservative Nationalism Conference, whatever their ideology, were the sort of people who would do that, and they were like, it ranged from 28 to 50, I would say.
So this was the winner in your category of what? Most important article of the last 3 weeks?
6 months.
I thought a year was a minimum for our award since this is the end of the year.
Well, we'll make it a year. What the hell?
Okay.
Your turn.
Most alarming psychopolitical trend of the last decade. You should have to guess.
Lack of mindfulness.
Well, yes. This is not unrelated to what I was going to say, which is negative partisanship.
Okay.
You know negative partisanship?
I think I know what it is.
Social science term for your political views being shaped fundamentally by your dislike of the other party. So rather than say like, well, what position on this policy issue is best for me, just go like, well, what is the other party like? And you get the answer, you go, well, then I hate it. Fundamentally, it's a politics driven fundamentally by animosity toward the other tribe. Right. As has come to be more and more the case. And you see it, I mean, one way you see it one result I don't like of it is like the way, Democrats have become the new Cold Warriors. Partly because, well, we're told that Trump is associated with the Russians, which first of all is a theory that they buy into so wholeheartedly and unreservedly, in part because they hate Trump, right? Right. And they like the idea that he's the Manchurian candidate and they can dismiss him on those grounds. But in any event, once he is thought to be associated with the Russians, well, then the Russians are the enemy too. And so their position on this particular international relations issue is set not because they're appraising the extent to which Russia does or doesn't pose a threat to the United States, but because they hate Trump. There's all,
it's happened on the FBI and spying too.
Yeah, well, this is another. I mean, you referred to Greenwald and Taibbi. I mean, this is one thing they're keeping straight is the actual issues and their actual views on them. They're a part of their argument is, no, wait. There's a reason that Democrats were not Cold Warriors. There's a reason that Democrats valued civil liberties and were very suspicious of, the intelligence state, the surveillance state, and so on. And let's hold true to those values. And they're complaining about the fact, what they're complaining about is a product of negative partisanship. Yeah.
That's what led to the notorious Bob Wright, Max Blumenthal alliance that got, did you write about in your current newsletter, Bob?
Newsletter, the Nonzero newsletter, which people can subscribe to by going to nonzero.org. Is it what?
Free.
It's free. I'm glad you asked that question, Mickey. It's free at finer websites.
Okay.
Everywhere. Yeah. That's an interesting case. So we actually, we got a lot of traffic from that piece. Because Glenn Greenwald tweeted it partly. Yeah. And so did some like-minded people. What?
Who you were attacked by?
Well, I had already been attacked by Quillette, the unofficial magazine of the intellectual dark web.
Okay, explain what the controversy was, quickly.
Well, quickly, I had Max Blumenthal, Lefty Firebrand. Max Blum. Max. Well, Sid. His father.
I've never met Max, but I know Sid. Yeah,
he's like Sid but younger, and different in many other ways. But they have differing views about Hillary Clinton, I believe. Anyway, Max and I agree about Syria, at least to the extent that we believe that the U.S. and its allies and the various actors in the Gulf should not have armed the rebels. Granted, that would have meant that Assad brutally crushed an insurrection. That would have been bad in and of itself. But it wouldn't have been as bad as getting a few 100,000 more people killed than that would have killed, creating millions of refugees, which probably led to Brexit passing, Trump getting elected, and so on. And in the end, Assad is running Syria anyway. So it just seems to me like it was a very bad idea. Max does too, but he is less inclined than I am to do the to be sure thing I just did, which, of course, crushing a brutal insurrection is bad in itself. Of course, Assad is a terrible person. I have learned you have to say these things because there are people who will just assume. Well, I mean, you've seen, that you're an, quote, Assad apologist.
Well, Tulsi Gabbard doesn't say those things. That's what
I was about to say. Tulsi Gabbard is a good. I mean, she has said them. She has said Assad is a brutal dictator.
Really?
She just, you can find videotape of her saying things like that. She just doesn't trot it out ritually in this preemptive way, which I personally recommend.
Yeah.
But Max really resents having to do that, so he doesn't do it very. I don't know. I mean, if you press him, he'll go, "No, I'm not defending Assad in the sense of defending atrocities and so on." But he doesn't like to do that. So Quillette had run this piece called "Tyranny's Mouthpiece," referring to him that way. Also kind of his colleague, Ronnie Akalik, who's also been on my show. And spending some time on my exchange with him and kind of casting some aspersions. I mean, curiously, Wright did not give as much pushback to Blumenthal as he gives to other guests. Right? You get the subtext, right? Like, I'm an Assad apologist. It's like incredibly crude. And the reason that's ironic is because I thought the intellectual dark web was against ad hominem attacks. Like, if one of them opposes affirmative action or something, and somebody calls them a racist, they say, "Hey, you can't attribute motive to me. Just argue on the merits. Here's my policy position." That's the whole thing of the intellectual dark web, right? They're against speech police who make these insinuations about motive and so on. And I was just pointing out that, well, it depends on the issue. On certain issues, they actually engage in this very kind of, attempts to stigmatize people they disagree with.
That is part of the intellectual dark web.
Oh, everyone says that. It is known as the unofficial magazine of the IDW. Everyone says that. That was not my invention.
You've given the IDW more coherence than I got from that article. That article seemed very badly edited. In other words, she said, Here's this star of the intellectual dark web, and here's this star. And she never said, Barry Weiss, who wrote the article, never says in that article what they stand for or why they're so special.
Well, she did. I mean, we're talking about the article that kind of created the IDW. It's like in my piece in the Nonzero newsletter, I do this, I replicate this graph from the Google search graph of the phrase intellectual dark web. You see this huge spike when her piece came out.
Sure.
And then it's down, and now it's kind of zero. But her piece, no, I think you're giving it short shrift. She claimed that what they were she emphasized their ideological diversity. I should say the piece in my newsletter is intellectual dark web, RIP intellectual dark web. It's basically dead. And the reason is it was a fiction in the first place because her claim that they were hugely diverse ideologically, but bound by this fierce opposition to speech codes and thought police. I'm saying that was bullshit and people slowly saw through it. Because they actually they are not ideologically diverse along all relevant dimensions. Apparently, there are some things they just don't speak up about. And moreover, when they really, some of them at least do engage in the very thought police tactics they claim to decry. And the Quillette piece was just a good example of that.
There are people who have been suspicious of Trump's whatever executive order initiative about anti-Semitism on campus, pointing out that it might penalize people who say Israel has no right to exist. Obviously, people should be able to say Israel has no right to exist without being accused of a hate crime. And I think there are people like Heather McDonald who've expressed skepticism about whether what Trump did was really a good thing. So,
well,
I don't
God
know
bless her,
IPW,
but I did use that as a data point in my piece because Greenwald's claim all along has been that they tend to be quiet on Israel issues.
Yeah, but I guess is it Eric Weinstein who's the guy who's
he's Brett's brother. He runs Thiel's.
Right, he works for Thiel.
He manages his money.
He's
something.
A really interesting guy, and the thing he is not as interesting. It is not true that the thing that's most interesting about him is his defense of free speech on campus. I mean,
what is interesting?
Well, he has, all sorts of theories about everything. He's a big thinker. He says
he's got some big physics theory or math theory or something that could be this huge thing, but I couldn't quite make heads or tails of it.
He has some theory about reality where there are like 17 dimensions. Not 17,
something like He was talking about that on the Joe Rogan show.
But he's a very smart guy. You want to hear him talk about anything, including immigration for that matter. But anybody can defend free speech. You don't need Eric Weinstein to do that. It seems weird to cabin him in this not so interesting way. But anyway, I just didn't like that article. I didn't understand.
The Bari Weiss article?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think I'll get into my cynical reading of it, but, yeah, I think I won't. But no, it was, the point of this piece I just wrote in the Nonzero newsletter was that it was a stupid piece to begin with. Yeah.
It smacked of a badly edited piece where they cut out all the substance just to get.
And yet, ironically, she is an editor in the opinion section of the New York Times.
Well, but you don't have any power if you're a writer. You can't. I mean, they say, well, we have space limitations. Let's just get to the photo of Eric Weinstein. My undercovered news story of the year.
Undercovered. Hey, I've got one of those, but okay. Go ahead. Go first.
I shouldn't. This is a very dangerous thing for me to bring up. UFOs. It seems to me.
I've got something more dangerous than that. And in fact, maybe I won't get into it, but go ahead.
If I'm going to make a fool of myself, you certainly are going to make a fool of yourself.
No, but mine is worse. Mine is more than being considered a fool.
Bob Long wrote a column pointing it out, and other people have pointed it out, that the Defense Department has stopped saying, oh, don't worry about those lights you saw going faster than the speed of sound and not obeying the law of physics. It's probably just a natural weather phenomenon, or there's an explanation for it. They stopped saying that, and now they say, hey, there was this aircraft, we don't know what the hell it was doing. There are two reasons. One is there are too many of them to explain away, and the second reason is it's all a propaganda move to justify Trump's Space Force, which he now has. I tend to believe the first one, and if there are aliens who are visiting us as if we were an ant colony and they could kill us with a flick of their wrist, that seems more important than our views on Medicare for all versus public option. Here's
what I think. If they got to a technological point where they are just light years ahead of us, I mean, if they were on some planet the way we are, and they if you assume that it's kind of like us, like we're on the verge of globalizing, and forming a cohesive global community, can't quite get our act together. And if we're going to just advance by leaps and bounds technologically, we're going to have to get through this period and get our shit together and not blow up the planet and not let it bake and so on. If it's like that, then I think for them to have gotten to the point, to this technological point they've gotten to, they'd probably have to be sufficiently morally advanced that they wouldn't just kill us for fun.
Well, but they might. What if they're like colonists in the 1800s, and they're competing factions from a planet, and they each want to colonize part of the Earth, and you have the Germans.
Yeah, but that's my point. They'd have had to get their shit together politically at the planetary level.
Why?
Because otherwise they stay like us, and they waste their time and energy.
Otherwise they couldn't invent hyperdrive. Maybe the negative partisanship between them, Bob, drove them to create the hyperdrive that lets them come here and torture us like an ant colony.
Well, my thesis is if we don't get over the negative partisanship and various other things, we're toast.
Well, that's reassuring. Well, they haven't killed us yet, and there's nothing we can do about it. But it does seem to merit more discussion than it's.
Did you saw these videos that the New York Times ran of these fighter pilots who spotted these UFOs?
No.
You didn't?
I heard of them.
The Times ran it twice. They ran it. I saw it and I thought, like, isn't this familiar? The Times, for reasons I don't understand, ran it like a year apart twice. There must have been some differences in it, but the same basic video. You should if you're going to be mouthing off about aliens, you got to check that out.
Well, I knew it existed. I just didn't.
It's these Air Force pilots going, whoa! It's like, it's doing that against the wind and all this stuff.
No, Well, maybe it's not undercovered if it's been in the New York Times twice, but I would think it's more important than it's the attention it's gotten.
Yeah. So, yeah, I actually know a pretty distinguished academic who agrees with you that it deserves more attention, and he may come on my show, but I can't say who he is because he's not fully out of the closet yet on UFOs. What?
Now it's interesting there are all these closeted academics. If you talk to the anti-Darwinians, they think that all these prominent academics really have doubts about Darwin's theory, but they can't come out of the closet and say it. It's like,
wait, who are these? Who are the people who are alleged to be in the closet?
I'm not going to say they're in the closet. I don't believe in outing people.
Oh, come on. You've got names?
Some people say that Noam Chomsky secretly doesn't buy Darwin's theory. He knows there's no evidence. Not that he doesn't buy it. But.
Well, Thomas Nagel said as much in his most recent book, or the last book I'm aware
of. Okay, I've made a fool of myself. Time for you to make a fool of yourself.
Okay, you can advise me on. I mean, I don't think I'm tempted to write about this, but I don't think, like maybe in my newsletter, I don't think the timing works out for various reasons. But so this is now it could. I mean, this is like. This may reach critical mass soon and actually break into the mainstream media. Okay. This is being filmed on December 27th. It's going to air on the 30th. And between the time we talk and the time it's posted, it's possible that this will break, but I kind of doubt it because the mainstream media really doesn't want to hear about this stuff. So, and you can advise me. I think, if I had like a Colonel Tom Parker. Was that Elvis's
Fingale?
Yeah. So, if I had a good PR advisor, they might advise me just not to write about this. But so WikiLeaks has been releasing a series of documents. Most recently this week, also a couple of weeks ago, also a few months ago, and so on. And what they add up to is this. So, I don't know if you remember, there were 2 chemical weapons attacks in Syria that the United States responded to with force.
Right.
And one was in Douma, D-O-U-M-A.
Right.
And these documents, it's not that they prove that it was a false flag attack or faked by the rebels, but they do establish, I should say I haven't checked out this week's documents, but as of last week, the one like a couple of weeks ago was the initial report actually prepared by the on-the-scene inspectors sent by the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, which is the UN body that implements the Chemical Weapons Convention. You know, these are the inspectors. And I remember saying at the time, tweeting that Trump, complaining that he was proceeding with the bombing before the inspectors could get to the scene. I was like, at least wait until the inspectors get there. Okay. So the inspectors got there after Trump bombs. I don't mean he bombed the scene. You know, he bombed the Syrian regime. Yeah. And so did France and England. And what is now clear is that a number of people on the actual inspecting team were pretty skeptical that an attack had taken place. A chemical attack in the first place.
I mean, there was some attack, right? There were dead people and stuff like that.
There were dead people.
Yeah.
But for example, if you read the initial report, it says, I mean, they didn't, by the time they got there, all they had was the video of the dead people. Right. You know, the bodies had been moved. But now that you bring up the bodies, one thing they said was, you know, the only thing it was alleged to be in a chlorine attack. And the only thing that even trace elements were found of is chlorine. And that could have come from like a household product containing chlorine. Tons of things have chlorine and so on. So, whatever levels they found of that, and they did find things that could be the result of contact with a chlorine containing product of some kind. That's what they found. No other known chemical weapons was there any evidence of chemically. And in any event, I think there were other people saying it's chlorine. I think the two kind of cylinders they found, one in one apartment, I think one on a rooftop or something. I think they maybe had contained chlorine. But first of all, an example is where the bodies were. They said, if this is a chlorine attack, this is not where you find the bodies. People immediately head for windows and exits.
Right.
And this was like a cluster of bodies not near the windows. Okay. So this is an example of the thing the on-scene inspectors said. They also said, we don't understand how these things that were allegedly dropped from the sky got to where they are. Like the hole in the roof is here, but the cylinder that supposedly came through it is over there. And there were a number of things led to a report that you would have to say is on balance skeptical from the people who are actually there from the OPCW. Okay? Now, subsequently, the OPCW, the higher ups, okay, they assessed the report, then they issued like an interim draft report that was only viewed internally.
Right.
And only one guy on the team of actual on-the-ground inspectors was allowed to read it. And he wrote an email in protest saying, wait a second, you guys are you significantly overstating the chances that this was a chemical weapon. So you're significantly overstating our confidence. Let me be clear. Here's what it means to find the evidence of contact with a chlorine-containing substance. And let me remind you, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, they because of the doubts about the cylinders that supposedly were dropped from the sky, they got a guy within the OPCW to issue a report on that, who was an expert on that stuff, and he reached the same conclusion that was suggested in the initial on the ground report. Was like, he said it's more probable than not that these were not dropped from the sky, which was the whole claim of the rebels. They were dropped from the sky. There's a lot of little things like this, and then it becomes clear that there's this tug of war within the OPCW.
Right.
And the people on the ground, at least some representatives of that team, are really upset by this interim report. And so they tone the report down. I mean, remember, the position we're in now is America's already bombed. So has France and England. Well, it's going to be pretty damn awkward for them if the report comes out and it says there probably wasn't a chemical weapons attack, right? So you can imagine that political pressure might emanate from them, Right.
It's embarrassing, but we didn't, if I remember, we bombed an empty hangar and destroyed some obsolete warplanes. So. Yeah,
I don't even know. I didn't even know about that part.
It's not like we killed hundreds of people.
With me, the whole issue is, let me be clear on what the whole issue is it's not about the moral standing of the Assad regime. I mean, there were a lot of chemical weapons attacks. I've got to think that the Assad regime did do some of them. So it's not about whether they were or were not guilty of this. It's about the corruption of an important international body, the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons. I don't know if you remember, but I was like lobbying for the Chemical Weapons Convention. I was writing stuff about it. I was trying to convince people to write stuff about it back, and it was barely ratified in the U.S. Senate. And there is now definitely enough evidence that there were corrupting influences at work in the OPCW, which isn't to say that the attack didn't happen. I don't think we can be sure that there wasn't a chemical weapons attack. What it seems to me we can be sure of is there were these, all is not good in the OPCW. There is some, and I haven't even finished. I mean, I could go on. There's more and more stuff. There is testimony that U.S. officials, pressured the OPCW. I should add, the excuse for the OPCW's angle on the report is that there's the second group of people who rebels, I think, who claim to have been witnesses, and they're like off in Turkey or somewhere.
Right.
And the OPCW, I guess, puts a lot of emphasis on their claims. By the way, another thing, though, is that the symptoms seen in the videos of people, who had, in the aftermath of what was said to be a chemical attack, these symptoms were also inconsistent with a chlorine attack, according to the experts who did the first report.
Doesn't this make you think twice about wanting to subject U.S. sovereignty to such easily corruptible international organizations? Maybe you should avoid your crusade for world government if it's just going to be the tool of self-interested international bureaucrats.
This is why I take this personally, but it's not self-interested international bureaucrats. It's great powers applying pressure on the bodies. It's the U.S. applying pressure.
Right.
And God knows who else. So let me just say, if our mainstream journalists were, if journalism were functioning appropriately and well in the U.S., you would have already read about this in the Washington Post and the New York Times. You may eventually, but it's getting to the point where I don't see how they're going to keep at least acknowledging that, within the OPCW, there was real dissent and there's real.
They can easily turn it into an anti-Trump thing because Trump bombed.
Right.
Trump.
Right.
This is the only thing Trump did that was approved by the mainstream media was bombing Syria. And they can turn that against Trump too. Even this was a mistake.
I will emphasize that if I write about it. Now you tell me, it's a little late I guess the horses are out of the barns or whatever it is. But, should I just not, I mean, because there is, writing about this kind of stuff. I'm sure some journalists are not writing about this because they don't want to be cast. It's a rare opportunity to be cast as two things: conspiracy theorists and Assad apologists, right? So it's like, who wants to do that? So do you, as my Colonel Tom Parker, advise me to steer clear of this, aside from the fact that I've just, blabbed about it for 2 minutes?
I think that horse is out of the barn, but, there's an old Newsweek saying, get it first, but first get it second. And
I should give credit to people who are talking about. I mean, now the media ecosystem is so far flung and diverse that somebody's got to be talking about it. People who are talking about it are, let me just say, Aaron Mate on the Pushback podcast has interviewed a couple of people. The good one is this former Guardian correspondent from a couple of months ago. That's the more valuable of the two. Max Abrams, this academic, has been going on about it in Twitter.
Because I was worried that if you wrote about it, then the forces that are against it would mobilize to discredit whatever whistleblowers there are. But it sounds like they're already alarmed enough that discrediting would be going on. So I think you should write about it. I mean,
I'm just not sure there's going to be time because I'm not putting out a newsletter this week. We're on holiday. But
if it has been written about by the next newsletter 2 weeks from now, then write about it.
There's a complication with that too. But anyway, I'll take that under advisement.
And you're going to incur the wrath of the Dan Dresners of the world, Bob. This brings me to my award for the most obnoxious member of the Blogging Heads community. When I wrote a little item about how the move to get rid of Trump by these pro-Ukraine people was similar to the move to get rid of the corrupt pro-Soviet government of Ukraine, even though it was of questionable democratic norms. It really was a sort of violation of democratic norms, since the guy was actually elected and he was not removed in accordance with the Constitution. So, and I got this email from Dan Dresner saying, "Mickey, you're out of your depth, and you're going to get that when you write about this." And I said, "Could you be more condescending?" And he said, "Happy to oblige. You're wrong on immigration, wrong on Ukraine. Your intellectual trajectory has been on a downward trajectory for 2 decades." Well, tell us something new. Of course, everybody knows my intellectual trajectory has been downward. Give me a break. Anyway, I thought, and he was obnoxious to you too, Bob. I think you said, I have some doubts about the Maidan too, and he never answered your query.
Well, what happened? Oh no, here's what happened. I think you like tried to draw me into this. You tagged me and said, well, maybe you should talk to Bob Wright because he has some doubts about what happened, or something like that.
You wrote something. You took the bait. No,
here's what happened. He replied to your reference to me by saying, there was something, judging by my conversation with Bob, I'd say there was something dismissive of somebody, either you or me, that, he meant to convey just by linking to this conversation between me and him. And I have doubts as to how actually relevant that conversation was to the point he was trying to make, but I didn't really explore it deeply. And then, no, the only dissing I think I got was at that point, I said, like, Dan, can you elaborate? Because something or other. Can you elaborate? And he didn't answer me. That's a kind of a dissing. I should resent that. You're right. I'm pissed. And I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm not going to take this anymore.
He's just the sort of person who will object with the fashionable self-referential mob, which I think you call the blob, on foreign policy.
Not original to me. Everyone calls him the blob.
Oh, if you question,
he is a member of the blob. Well, my discussion with him that he linked to was about the blob. He's a member. I'm an opponent.
Okay. Well, we've settled his hash.
Yeah, I want to find out one thing, because one of the main guys pushing this, who is trying to get publicity for the Syria chemical weapons thing, is named Max Abrams. And I'm kind of wondering if he's at Tufts, something where Dan is, but maybe not. Anyway, Tufts.
You could start a fist fight. That'd be great. In the halls
between
Abramson and Dresner, and they could fight in the hallway of the faculty lounge of Tufts. Never mind.
And we'd be there to cover it. So, let's see, what else?
I have things I completely missed that show that I don't really know what I'm talking about.
I'm shocked, but what are they?
Well, I thought Elizabeth, I'm always wrong about this. I remember after in 1988 telling a group of people it was obvious that Gephardt was going to win the nomination. And of course he didn't. And it was obvious to me 3 months ago. I remember confidently telling the executives of Substack, when they had a little Substack party for our newsletters here in Los Angeles, that it was obvious Elizabeth Warren was going to win the nomination. And she surged to the front and then subsequently collapsed. And I guess I don't quite understand why she collapsed. I didn't see it coming. I also didn't see Pete Buttigieg's collapse coming, but that's sort of more explicable. But I don't understand quite why Warren collapsed. It can't be that people. Is it really that people don't like a screechy, strident woman? I mean,
well, that's more plausible than the other theory, which is that the numbers on her healthcare plan didn't add up. I mean, here's something I don't understand in general: is that, like, one of these candidates will say something, and like the elites who populate Twitter will agree that it was bad, or the numbers don't add up, or this or that. And then that will seem to actually be reflected in the polls, whereas I can't believe that there are actually many people beyond the small number of elites on Twitter who are even paying attention to whether the numbers add up on a healthcare plan.
Exactly. And the same thing happened to Buttigieg, which is he's attacked by Jacobin magazine.
Right, exactly.
For his defense of means testing, which is an interesting issue. And fine, how many people read Jacobin magazine? Why does he then fall 10% in the polls in Iowa?
But there was a broader anti-Buttigieg consensus on Twitter, I think, because he rubs a lot of people the wrong way. He just looks like the kind of guy who would have been angling for his Rhodes Scholarship since, his senior year in high school and so on. Well, of course he was. But I'm just saying it wasn't just socialists who don't like Buttigieg, but you're right that a lot of the heat came from, you're right, the kind of anti-neoliberal left. That's true. That's a good point. That's certainly one of the examples I have in mind is like, okay, so you see some elites on Twitter saying this stuff like, how many troops do they command out in the grassroots? Right. Well, to look at the polls, you'd think they command a lot.
Yeah, well, maybe the web has more power than we thought, Bob. We actually command large blocks of voters.
Let's conduct an experiment. Let's just you and I endorse a candidate and see if the polls change.
It's a mystery. I don't understand it. Iowa sort of is plausible because it's a caucus, so activists have exaggerated power. But Buttigieg has fallen in a lot of polls.
He really seems to have hit a fatal plateau. But although it's early, look, if he wins Iowa, everybody will be talking.
Iowa is in the throes of Clomentum, Bob. We think Klobuchar is surging.
But in the national polls, she's still under 5%.
Right, and if she wins in Iowa, she'll get a big boost, but people will dismiss it as a regional win because she comes from a neighboring state. But she'll be back on the map. She'll be one of the top candidates.
Now, that reminds me, though, the thing that doesn't seem to drive national poll numbers is elite consensus on who did well at debates. Because everybody said that last debate, she really shone, right?
Well, and she's surging. No,
she's not surging nationally, is she?
Well, she's surging in Iowa where it counts.
Well, okay, but these are two different things. I mean, we both just agreed that on some policy issues, Twitter elites do seem to drive nationwide poll numbers or at least influence them. With Klobuchar, that didn't happen after that debate. But it wasn't a policy issue. It was an analysis of how she did politically.
I don't know. I find it hard to believe she didn't rise, and certainly Kamala Harris
little.
Kamala Harris rose after she put down Biden in that one debate. She then fell back down.
True. And everyone agreed that, that's true. That was a case where the numbers did move. Everybody said this is a big deal, and it was. What's that?
I thought she was a jerk, so I didn't agree with it, but the consensus of opinion was she did well.
I was never a big Kamala fan. So could it be? So who is Klobuchar? Klobuchar's actually in it. You think she could do well enough in Iowa to?
And keep in mind, Gary Hart only finished second in Iowa, and he was vaulted into prominence and actually then won New Hampshire. So
who's out of it? Don't you think
quickly.
Klobuchar's got to fix the shaky hair? Her hair shakes.
People notice that. I didn't notice that, but
oh my God, it's the most. It's like, please. It's like, can we listen on radio? It's completely upsetting.
Has it happened more than once?
It always. I didn't see the last debate, but in all of the previous debates, her hair shakes as one.
She's got to. She should make a thing about it. Obviously, she should say she's discovered a new power source: hydropower, hair power, wind power.
So who's going to win? Who's going to win the nomination?
I haven't the faintest idea. I've learned to completely distrust my instincts.
What worries me is that it's hard to imagine anyone but Biden winning, and yet I just see him getting completely torched by Trump. My view of Biden is that the cognitive decline is proceeding rapidly enough so that it will get worse before next November. Is that crazy?
I think that's crazy. He was quite okay in this recent debate.
I've got that taped. I should go watch that debate. Maybe it'll change.
He wasn't great, but he didn't screw up, and he's now screwed up so much. He's like Pat Brown, the beloved governor of California, who was constantly bumbling and saying malapropisms and completely inarticulate, and it came to be a lovable characteristic of the guy.
Well,
right?
But Biden was always like that. This is different.
It is. How's it different?
It's
how's it different from, say, my cognitive decline, which Dan Dresner helpfully pointed out?
Wasn't yours an ideological decline or something? I
think it was a total decline in all aspects, but yes, it was ideological. Yes, intellectual.
How's it different? It's like him getting lost in like he really doesn't know. Well, sometimes he literally doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know what state he's in, but sometimes he doesn't know where in his train of thought he is. And it also, it worries me that his response to the concerns about his age and cognitive health are to just act like feisty and tough, like he did with that, I guess, that heavy set guy that he challenged to push-ups in an IQ test.
Well, that's his standard response.
Yeah, but I don't know if it was his response 10 years ago, but I don't think it's a good look right now. It's because for one thing, it's not done that deftly.
Yeah.
Because of the aforementioned cognitive issue. I'm sorry, am I being too hard on him? It's not like it's.
I think you are. If you remember, he got driven from the '88 race.
That was plagiarism, wasn't it?
No, that was the first charge. But the coup de grace was when he challenged some guy in the crowd who was a real twit and got under his skin by saying, "I think I have a higher IQ than you do, buddy." And then
did he?
He said that. You can go to the video still on the web, and then he recited 5 academic achievements, 4 of which turned out to be bullshit. So
yeah, but see, you know what would happen now? He would say, "Let me tell you my 5 academic achievements," and after 1 or 2, he wouldn't be able to finish.
That would have been better because then he would have forgotten 3 more lies.
Fewer errors. Yeah, okay, you're right. Maybe he'll do better. Maybe he'll do better than ever because he commits fewer errors because he never finishes his lists. That's a good point.
His best shot is, I'm the guy who floats above everything and I'll be a calming influence and other people will do all the work in my administration. So that might be appealing to people. I don't think the cognitive decline has that much to do with that. I think he's as strong as the other candidates. I see them all. I can see them all losing to Trump, and I can see a couple of them beating Trump.
I think the person who stacks up best against Trump in a debate is probably Bernie, but he can only win if he liberates himself from that healthcare leg iron.
Well, if that's what it takes, he'll do it. I mean, so
I don't know. The thing about him is he is truly a guy of principle. He believes it. And you know, I'm all for universal health care. I'm just saying that his particular plan is a political handicap in a general election.
You're not sacrificing your principles if you take as close to your principles as you can politically get. So,
but don't you imagine him doing well on a debate stage with Trump better than Biden? I mean, Sanders is an interesting question.
He's hard to intimidate in the macho war. Yeah.
He's hard to intimidate, and he doesn't lose his cool. He's not going to challenge Trump to push-ups.
And he has, like Trump, he has a genuine, spontaneous sense of humor in the moment.
And he also probably does a better job of competing for a certain kind of Trump voter than any of the other leading candidates, right? He's an economic populist.
I thought Warren had that potential, too. And
yeah, but there may be that may get back to the thing you said about her being, you know, seen as a screeching female or whatever you said. There may be cultural. They just, you know, the Trump voters who would vote for Bernie, just their conception of what a president should be may not include this woman or a woman, possibly. I don't know.
It's possible. Anyway, I like screechy women, so that's my target demographic.
Some of my best friends.
So I'm a bad judge of this.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm through with my 3.
Wait. Okay. So I did a most underreported story of the year. I did the craziest theory about what will happen if Trump wins, which was yours. I did most alarming psychopolitical trend of the decade, negative partisanship. I think that here's the biggest psychosocial trend with political implications, which is not to be confused with the psychopolitical trend of the last decade, which is the shift in the perception of technology and the Silicon Valley potentates, right? I mean, 5 years ago, I think, at some point, people were seriously asking if Mark Zuckerberg was going to run for president.
Right.
It's hard to remember these days, but there was a time after the original coverage of Facebook was so glowing. Of course, this was a little before 2010, but not long before. I mean, at the beginning of this decade, Silicon Valley was still held in high esteem. The idea that they were, the technology was going to be on balance good, and moreover, that a lot of them were motivated to do good. These were pretty widely accepted things.
Right. It's
flipped completely.
If Zuckerberg didn't run, Sheryl Sandberg was going to run his number two. And she has put herself in a bad odor too, I guess, in the course of defending what Facebook does.
Yeah.
So
it's hopeless.
Nobody wants her to run for president either. I think that's where this dovetails with that Julius Krein theory, which is that our economy is now geared to funneling all the money to a few mega potentates at the top, and Zuckerberg is one of them. The other one is Jeff Bezos. A friend of mine who manufactures things and listens to a lot of podcasts pointed out that Amazon is not just a threat to retail. Everybody knows that if you have a store, Amazon is going to crush you because you can order the stuff on Amazon. But Amazon is a threat to manufacturing too. If you make something that is a success on Amazon, they will copy it, make it themselves, and put you out of business. So they'll turn it into like the Amazon house brand. So you don't really want to do too well on Amazon because then you're on their radar screen and then they destroy you. So all of manufacturing will be funneling stuff to Amazon, funneling money to Amazon. And it dovetails with this. It's only the top 0.1%, not the top 30% that are benefiting in the current economy.
Yeah, this is a CVS trick, and various chains have done this. They get their own brand, but CVS is particularly egregious about just juxtaposing their aspirin with the Bayer aspirin and showing you how much it costs per pill, and doing this with a lot of products. But of course, with Amazon, it has much more sweeping implications. I mean, they can put tons of people out of business, even aside from the fact that from their power in putting their ability to put individual websites out of business or, various things like that. But yeah, no, Amazon, I mean, I'm torn. I have a lot of admiration for Jeff Bezos. In some ways, I think he's the most creative and interesting of all the entrepreneurs in tech. But I worry about all of them, but Amazon, I think is concerning. The other thing, I don't want to get conspiracy minded. But I noticed he left in place when he bought the Washington Post, left in place the editorial board, which is, of course, pretty pro-military intervention. Not neocon in a crude sense, but neocon-ish in a more idealistic sense of right. I think they really believe in democracy promotion and stuff, but militaristic in the upshot of their policy prescriptions. He left them all in place, and then I realized Amazon angles for huge Pentagon contracts, and I came across a video. We can link to the Wired piece I wrote about this some time ago, but
wrote about it or read it?
I wrote about it.
Oh, really? Okay.
About the fact that Bezos is like, well, gosh, if we can't, he was responding to these protests at places like Google and Microsoft about their angling for Pentagon contracts. Right. Some of their workers were rebelling. And he said, well, listen, if we get to a point where we can't defend the U.S., I don't know, I can't go along with that. So in other words, Amazon's going to be angling for these contracts. And what I said was, how could he possibly look at the way we have deployed weapons? Because that's what with Microsoft and especially Google, we were talking about things with implications for weapon systems. How could he look at the way we deployed weapons for the past couple of decades and argue that it's actually helped keep America safe? Anyway, I That's too much.
This stuff tails into the whole Port Huron thing. People look at the tech future, and they don't like it. They don't like where we're going. We're going to at best, we're going to to become a society of lonely, isolated consumers who get a lot of goods cheap and have no community and no interaction with each other, and not enough meaningful interaction, at least the way we used to have. And people don't like that. So there's a reckoning coming.
It's worse than that. It may make them lonely. Of course, there is online socializing and so on, but it also makes inevitably a certain number of them crazy because it increases paranoia, right? I mean, don't you know more and more people who say, like, I don't think it's just a coincidence that I mentioned this thing in a cell phone conversation and then, whoa, an ad for this thing pops up on my browser, like.
So many people say that. I think it's just assumed that they're listening to everything. And
well, okay, and for every 1,000 paranoids you create, a couple of them go crazy and kill people or do crazy stuff, right?
I think people have willingly surrendered their privacy. I don't think anybody thinks they're.
I think they're ambivalent, but
I haven't thought cell phones were private since after 9/11. It turned out we were running every phone call in Europe through a computer in Scotland to search for terrorism. I mean,
but you don't think people are actually listening to your calls, do you?
Well, I think there was a computer listening for keywords.
Do you really think that?
A computer?
Well, you realize that would be a total scandal if that were true.
Well, they were definitely doing it to Europe, and do I think they're secretly doing it to the United States? I'd say 50-50.
Well,
I mean, after
9/11,
you would sort of be crazy not to do that, wouldn't you? You have the technical capability. You're terrified of another terrorist attack. You can secretly, run every and plus, isn't the way wiretapping works is we store all the calls anyway, right? And when we wiretap somebody, that just means we reach into the computer and open up the file that already exists of all of Bob Wright's telephone conversations, and we listen to them. So the file's already there. Why not just listen to them all
well, we certainly don't know that the files are there. We know that the metadata is there. They're not supposed to be recording my calls and storing them anywhere.
Oh, I thought that's how it worked.
No.
Well,
it's the metadata. Nobody is supposed to be. It would be a scandal if it turned out that they were actually storing the recorded versions of all the phone calls happening in America. That's not supposed to be.
How does the wiretap work then? The wiretap is only prospective. It can't be retrospective.
Yeah, it has to be prospective. Now, metadata is a different matter.
No,
I don't know about the status of text. Now, texts are a little different. Text messages are preserved on the servers of your carrier or somebody else.
Right.
So that's more complicated. But phone calls, no.
Huh.
Now, but, I mean, related is, don't you think there are more and more conspiracy theorists? There are more and more paranoid people, more and more conspiracy theorists. And I guess I've just identified myself as one of them with that chemical weapons thing, so maybe I should shut up. But I guess the one good trend, the one potentially positive trend of the last decade is more awareness of cognitive biases, right? 10 years ago, nobody had heard of confirmation bias, virtually. The term cognitive bias wasn't nearly so prevalent. Now we are, at least in principle, aware of the fact that we should scrutinize our own perceptions and thought patterns for signs that we're confused. We're not doing it by and large, but we're aware that in principle.
Well, that's an upbeat note.
Well, it is because in principle that could subdue the political polarization, the tribalization that drives conflict in international relations, the stuff that brings us into wars, and so on. That is the great hope. Is metacognition, aware of our own cognitive patterns and biases. That's the great hope I leave you with.
Okay. Wasn't that Freud's great hope also? Isn't that what it means? Where it was, ego shall be, or so we have our ego.
I don't. That's a good question. Well, that's a good question. I wasn't aware of his hoping for any particular evolution, but maybe you're right. I should look into that. I mean, it's not like, he was, by modern lights, right about nearly everything in terms of the way the mind works, but I don't know about that. But I do know that one of us has written a book about mindfulness meditation that may be relevant to this.
Not according to Adam Gopnik.
Hey, you managed to complain about Adam Gopnik in this recent newsletter piece of yours. That is the one part of your piece that I applaud.
I complain about Adam Gopnik at every available opportunity. There's a good chance. Yeah. I will embarrass myself in saying the most under-criticized man in journalism is David Remnick, Gopnik's editor, for publishing people like him. Well, he let his magazine go berserk when Trump was elected in an embarrassing way.
Not all that different from the way the New York Times went or any number of other mainstream.
The New York Times won better in order to maintain the New Yorker's place in the hierarchy. They had to say Trump was evil. He had to say Trump was an actual Nazi with actual Nazi references. And he did it from the day after. There's a friend of mine pointed out the day after Trump was elected, Remnick was out of the box with a piece that basically gave permission to all New Yorker writers to go as berserk as they want. It sort of said Trump is evil. We have to oppose him with every fiber in our being. Blah blah blah. It set the tone for the rest of the magazine for the rest of his term.
Well, if that's true, I don't know if that's true, but if it's true, it had ramifications beyond the magazine because the New Yorker is one of the cultural touchstones that other elites use to get their signals.
Right.
I don't mean signals that are intentionally sent, but the way we all take cues. By the way, interesting thing in this back to the chemical weapons thing. There's a reporter for Newsweek who quit because Newsweek wouldn't let him write about this chemical weapons thing.
No.
And he was interviewed by Aaron Mate on Pushback. And he wrote this long screed online. And honestly, after I read at least part of the screed, it didn't, I'm not sure he has entirely retained his perspective on the thing. I mean, I think he's right that there's something here that should be reported, but he kind of went on and on about things. Yeah. But anyway, one interesting thing was, he leaked. He printed an internal Newsweek email from somebody explaining why they weren't going to let him write about the chemical weapons thing. And what the editor said was, not necessarily the editor of Newsweek, but some editor said, there were a couple of mainstream outlets that had. This is months ago when WikiLeaks released something, and then the OPCW responded with some kind of denial or minimization. And the editor said, look, the only two mainstream outlets who have done it are these guys, and they led with the OPCW's denial. Like, Newsweek was using that as a guide to whether to proceed with the story. I mean, they were that self-conscious about taking their cues from other mainstream outlets.
That's the traditional Newsweek bias is get it first, but first get it second, i.e. take your cue.
Oh, yeah, you said that. You said that. That's exactly what this was.
Yeah, they don't like to stick their neck out.
No, but look, the truth is more mainstream outlets than we would like to admit operate exactly like that, even if they're not quite as conscious of it. It's like...
That's why they become a blob, Bob.
It is, and that's why on a story like this, it pretty much has to be just about the Washington Post, New York Times, maybe a couple of others, Wall Street Journal, who break the ice, or else all kinds of other ones are going nowhere with it.
Well, if you don't show up at our next Blogging Heads, I'll know the blob has gotten to you.
If I don't show up?
Yeah.
Blob ain't getting to me, dude. Question is whether I go too far in my ardent opposition to the blob. Which leads us to what may be our concluding note. Did I ever you and I used to have this argument, like, which of us? I argued that people who know us both considered you crazier than me. You argued that people who know us both consider me crazier than you. Do you remember this argument?
No, it seems obvious that they would now think I'm crazier than you because of Trump.
Yeah, but this was before that. And the following anecdote is before that. So in 2014, at the 100th anniversary of the New Republic in Washington, I rode home from that.
You were invited to and I wasn't invited to.
Well, they don't invite crazy people to these things.
There you go. Okay.
Is that true?
Yes.
In fact, and didn't somebody lobby on your behalf? Somebody like Mike Kinsley?
Probably.
No?
I don't know.
Well, look, it's not like those guys. They were overthrown 3 minutes. Maybe they were overthrown because of that. Because they made that call. Anyway, that regime was overthrown immediately.
I should claim that.
But I shared a cab home from that. I shared a cab with Mike Kinsley to his apartment, and then I guess I went to the train station or something. But and I asked him. I said, "Who is crazier, me or Mickey?" And he said, "You're crazy." He said, "You're crazy in different ways." And then he said, "You'd be more likely to blow up a bridge or something." Meaning, I would actually go full on I would like get so pissed about something that I would go full on revolutionary. And I don't know, if I were in the blob, Mickey, I would be. Just keep that in mind. You know what I'm saying? You never know when Bob will just go too far.
Okay. Well, I'll direct all blob retaliation to you.
I can handle it. No, of course, this was before I became so conspicuously associated with mindfulness. So it's not a problem. Now, I'm not going to blow anything up. I'm not.
Okay. Well, it was useful to. It was all worth it if it restrains your violent impulses.
Now, traditionally, when we go on way too long, Mickey, we throw out a word, an obscure word, and we ask people who stayed this long to repeat it in the comments section.
How long have we gone?
way too long.
Oh, really? Okay.
Like, at least an hour and a half.
Okay. That's too long.
Yeah, I know. So what's the word? Well, while you're thinking of the word, I'll say that they can find you on Twitter at what?
Kausmickey, at Kausmickey.
Kausmickey. They can find me at Robert Wright. And by the way, my pinned tweet is a reply to the aforementioned Adam Gopnik. So what's the word? Gopnik? No, let's don't do him the favor.
Yeah.
Maybe his sister, Allison? No. I like her. God, Joe Biden could have come up with an answer by now, Mickey. Come on.
I know. Artisanal. Iconic.
Okay. Oh, yeah, because you say that iconic is the most annoying
word of the decade.
Okay, so let's make it iconic, because that they can work in smoothly. No one will know. It's not like shibboleth, which was the last one, I think.
It turned out Tim Noah wrote a long piece about why iconic was not just overused, but actually evil, because it equated fame with success.
Okay.
Yeah, iconic's fine.
Iconic, and you get extra credit if artisanal is in there too. Okay, so we'll see you down. Oh, should we close with an actual prediction? Who's going to win the Democratic nomination? You got to go. You got to predict.
I got to go?
Yeah.
Biden.
I often predict my fear, and in that case, I think Biden might be the fear just because. So, but the alternative strategy is to pick a low probability thing, what's seen as low probability, and will make you seem like a genius. So I'm going to go with Sanders. He's considered more of a long shot than I think he is. And I predict that Trump will beat Biden, but Sanders will beat Trump.
Okay.
Who will win your Biden-Trump race?
Trump.
Yeah, well, we agree on that. Okay.
Okay.
Sad note to end on.
Okay.
See you around.
See ya.